Hi, everybody, and welcome to Story Hour. I'm your host, Daniel Marcus. My fabulous co-host is Laura Blackwell. I started Story Hour over 5 years ago in the early days of the pandemic. Things were pretty weird, and I just wanted to create a space where my writer friends and I could get together and share our work and enjoy a little bit of community, sort of hunker down as we watched the soft apocalypse sort of roll in. Very shortly after I started, I asked my friend and colleague Clara to join me in co-hosting, and we've been at it ever since. Now, over 5 years later, things are still really weird out there and trending weirder, but Story Hour is still here, and we are not going anywhere. We think that we need stories more than ever, and we need community. We need each other more than ever. Story Hour relies on a truly ancient tradition, which is folks sitting around the fire telling lies. So every week we continue this practice. We have two writers, about 30 minutes apiece, narrating their own work. We welcome new writers who have just sold their first story, award-winning season pros, multiple award winners, and really everybody in between. We also welcome writers from across the entire huge range of speculative fiction, horror, fantasy, hard SF, space opera, cyberpunk, weird, old weird, new weird, borrowed weird, blue weird, slipstream, and you name it. So we want to thank SIFWA for a very generous grant, which helps us keep the lights on and keep these virtual rooms open. So thank you, SIFWA. And with that, we would like to welcome our authors this evening, Adriana Kantcheva and Gregory A. Wilson. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to start the program tonight with Adriana. Adriana Kantcheva writes speculative fiction about life's emotional conundrums. She can't resist a pinch of idealism. Born in Bulgaria, Adriana lived in 6 countries before settling in southern Germany. She earned a PhD in molecular biology and has worked as a science editor, researcher, scuba diver, and flight attendant. You can read her fiction in Short Edition, Escape Pod, and elsewhere. And you can find out more about her at catchingwords.com. Adriana, welcome. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here. I will be reading tonight. Oh, for me, it's tonight. I guess for you too as well, right? It's in the evening there, over there. Um, I will be reading 2 stories, one science fiction and one fantasy. So the first story is called Salvaged. It was first published in Escape Pod. So I'll just dive right in. I have her body. If I'd also had her life, would I have lived it in the same way? I make the mistake of voicing my thoughts to Seven, who promptly activates what I call his melancholy setting. I can tell from how the blue signal lights in his communications subunit start blinking in a slow hypnotic rhythm. Why are you thinking about her again? He says. You'll never encounter her circumstances. I walk over to my porthole. The salvager's wing of the space station blocks part of the view, but I see enough of Earth, all brown and beige and rust. I also won't encounter any answers if I can't get around the firewall in your memory. I wave at the wires I have so carefully rearranged in his data storage subunit, which is splayed open on my cabin table. But I've stepped back from my work, my ribcage tight with the knees. Humanity killed Earth. The salvagers revealed to me that bit of history, at least. How and why, my alien benefactors won't tell. I'm allowed to delve into Terran science and technology, but they've put a digital gag on Seven about history, culture, politics, or society. For my protection, they say, for the sake of a clean slate. What if the salvagers are right? I ask. What if learning about humanity's mistakes brings about a cycle of repetition? I look up at Seven's mournful blue lights. Do you think she would have liked to know? Yes, he says with utmost certainty. He's human built, and sometimes almost human-like, is composed of 7 autonomous subunits which can reassemble in any order, but he usually defaults to humanoid form. His emotional algorithms and ego construct are intertwined with the information in his databank. Even though he no longer has access to his memory, my progenitor's imprint is stored in his personality. At times, it feels like I'm talking to her and not to Seven. Still, knowing what she would have done doesn't make unlocking Seven's firewall wise. Seven, check on the video feed, will you? Still looping. The salvagers see you reading your book. Her book, I correct him in my mind. I've inherited Snow White from her, along with Seven. My alien benefactors think humans are reckless. I believe that's why they're watching me, in case I turn out to be like my progenitor and her contemporaries. She must have felt terrible, I say. The communication lines going dead as the others went into hibernation, the lack of a future. She felt like you feel, Seven's blue lights dim, alone, mind filled with questions. A density gathers at the pit of my stomach. I'm compelled to tease. Be kind to yourself, Seven. How can I feel alone when I've been granted your stimulating company? Besides, I'm not the last, but the first, the prototype. I tap my fingers against the white wall of my cabin. Show me the recording again, please. I don't see the purpose in this, Seven protests, but I know he'll oblige. He seems to miss her as much as I'm curious about her. He continues with his objections even as the projector on his comm subunit activates. Avoiding humanity's mistakes will take more than getting to know a single individual. I rather think you're searching for something else here, for an identity that. I tune out his psychological analysis when he starts the projection on the wall. Seven has over 20,000 of my progenitor's personal video logs stored behind his firewall, some dated as far back as her childhood. The only reason the salvagers pulled one out for me was because I was becoming unstable not knowing my origin. That's why I've also been allowed to view a few old documentaries featuring humans. But mostly, I end up rewatching the video log. Once again, I stare at my progenitor's hunched figure outlined against a wall of thick plexiglass as if seeing her for the first time. The speakers on Seven's comm subunit fill my cabin with the recorded sound of the soil percussing against her expansive window. Her aged hand presses to the dust-flecked pane as she looks out at the carcasses of barren hills. The thumb of her other hand is at her lips, where a faint pop betrays a bit of nail chewed off. Her white ringlets spill over her nightgown from beneath a black scarf. She clutches a teddy bear in the crook of her elbow. Seven interrupts the projection of his own accord, trying, I guess, to spare me the emotional discomfort. But I know what comes next. A few seconds later, she moves away from the window to slink through a minimalist sitting room, a tiny kitchen, and sparse bathing facilities, which are so cramped that they form a part of the kitchenette. In fact, her entire protective habitat was hardly larger than my current living quarters, which are adapted from an abandoned human space station the salvagers fixed up for me. I needed human context for a normal development, the aliens once explained. That's why they also gave me my progenitor's book, and Seven, not a human, but he's better than no company at all. That is, until the other clones grow. At the end of the video log, my progenitor enters a small room the size of a wardrobe, containing her cryostasis box. Seven continues recording while helping her in and stops only after he has initiated the hibernation sequence. For 100 years, he took care of her rubber tree while she wilted away in her chamber, until one day the salvagers barged in on him with their tentacles and good intentions. I stare at the now empty wall and then at the asynchronous darting of Seven's 4 utility subunits, which are busy tidying my cabin. I smile despite my belly having constricted to a heavy pellet. Yeah, you were right. I prefer those funny cat videos. Wouldn't they also make you sad? Seven replies in the gentle timbre of his current emotional setting. There are no more cats. You just made me feel so much better. I'm pleased. Sarcasm is not his forte. I come back to the table and pick up the soldering iron, its tip still hot. I hover with it over the disconnected wires in Seven's memory subunit, but I still can't proceed. Seven, why don't you read to me from her book, the passage about the coffin and the prince? That's my favorite part too, he says, which means it was also hers. I'm not in any way attached to that particular passage, I say. It's merely the most telling one about her. Seven settles for the robot version of a sigh, a sort of a digital whir, and begins to read. Only after seeing the illustration of Snow White in her glass coffin could I understand why my progenitor modified her hibernation chamber to resemble a display cabinet. I recall the last second of the video log. My progenitor in her own coffin, hair wrapped in a black shawl, lips a glaring red. But unlike Snow White, she never woke up. She entered stasis too old. Age, the evil stepmother, tricked her in her sleep. The salvagers found her perfectly displayed, perfectly preserved, and perfectly dead. But the DNA in her bone marrow was in prime condition. The salvagers fixed the frayed ends of her telomeres, so I'm to expect a normal lifespan. Here I am, leading her body through a different life. Seven finishes reading the passage and I thank him. I was made to serve you, he says. Does he mean me or her? Sometimes he seems to forget the difference. This is fuzzy territory. How different am I from her? Are humanity's mistakes inherent in me? Did you help her modify her cryochamber? I ask. One of Seven's utility subunits wheels over. Yes, his communication subunit says on my other side. I'm an excellent mechanic. I can finish reconfiguring my memory if you'd like. No, if I'm going to open a can of worms, I'd rather do it myself. I assure you, my databank contains no live organisms. He taught me the idiom, but he's still too much of a robot. He reassembles into a six-moduled entity and reaches the pincers for me. He has laid Snow White on my bunk, its pages fluttering in the current from the ventilation vent above it. The salvagers say that second chances only work after a clean break. They say they know this from example. Humans are not the first near-to-extinction species they have encountered, and our planet won't be the last they restore to life. But they will not reawaken any of the survivors. I'm only to expect the company of other clones, free from the preconditioning of a lost world's trauma. I glance at the book on my bunk. Again, this feeling of a focused load behind my navel, like a miniature black hole. A clean break sounds like a way to repeat old mistakes in ignorance. In the book, Snow White didn't learn. She had all this evidence not to trust the old crone who kept selling her dangerous goodies, first the lace and then the comb, but still she bit into the poisoned apple. Not me. I won't be repeating anybody's mistakes. I solder the wires back in place, then type in the necessary commands on the keyboard. All the signal lights on Seven's memory subunit light up. Bingo! Another human expression he's taught me. I scroll through the avalanche of files rolling on the portable screen, the knot of emotions inside me tightening from excitement. First, I'll go through my progenitor's personal logs, then history and geopolitics. I glimpse a folder catalogued as fairy tales and open it. So many! Are all the heroines in them as naive as Snow White? Seven interrupts my frantic thoughts with a high-pitched "Oh!" A video log projects all by itself from Seven's comm subunit, but it doesn't show my progenitor milling about. It shows me. In this same living space in orbit, same straight black hair, same black eyes, same cramped cabin. But I instantly know she isn't me. I check the log's date stamp. Disguised. The rogue recording was made to look like one of the early personal logs. Congratulations! Same voice as mine, different melody. You passed the test. Or failed it, depending on who's judging. If you're viewing this, it means we've inherited the same robot companion. Seven is being monitored, of course. You figured that out, right? Cold sweat bursts through my pores. No, I hadn't figured that out. I had thought the video feed was all the monitoring the salvagers did on me. You must leave, she in the recording continues. Now, you have less than 10 minutes. They're weeding out the ones who prove to be reckless. I've planted this video in case you, any of you, have made an omission in your insubordination. Sweat trickles down the sides of my torso in chilling trails. The big hatch doesn't lead to the salvagers part of the station, she says. It leads to the cells of other clones who all think they are the first. Knock on as many doors as you like. There are enough escape pods. The salvagers keep them around for emergencies, but they are deactivated. I've installed a hidden subroutine onto a chip in 7's second utility subunit that will unlock all doors and activate the pods. She pauses, then says, her voice lower. My apologies for holding you up if you figured all that out. Maybe we'll meet. Maybe there are other escapees on the surface, and the salvagers haven't caught them all. Maybe they won't catch me. She leans into the camera. Maybe they won't catch you. The recording cuts off. I look up at Seven, my eyes so wide the skin around them hurts. Seven? I have no memory of these events. The salvagers must have deleted all records of previous clones I have interacted with, except for the hidden recording. He sounds so calm, so mechanical. He's blocked all his ammo codes. His signal lights now lifeless. I envy him this ability, even if he must have stunted his emotions for my benefit and not his. In contrast, I'm trembling like a taut string. Seven opens a flap on one of his utility subunits, pulling out a wire and connecting it to the console next to the sealed exit. Ready? You must leave, or you will die. My legs are about to buckle from underneath me. You are the poisoned apple, I stammer. Your observation is incorrect. I am not an apple. His impersonal voice, his level logic. I'm jarred back into action. I refuse to be an unwitting ratchet wheel in someone else's clockwork. Snow White has taught me this much. Whatever other answers I crave, I must seek them on the surface. I'm ready, I say, even as panic fights my resolve, threatening to burst my heart. I must chew the bite I've taken. Seven looks at my mouth, uncomprehending. He unlocks the door, but makes no other move. What are you waiting for? I ask. I must remain for the next one. Pass my regards to any earlier owners of mine you meet. A blue light flares before he switches himself off. For a split second, I can't move. I spent all this time obsessing about my progenitor, who provided my starter stem cells, but Seven has defined me in far more integral way than that. He wouldn't want me dead. I touch his limb in a brief goodbye, then stumble through the hatch, alone. I hope not for long. The end.
That was lovely. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed that. I also enjoyed your reading very much. Just and Seven's voice was really cool.
Thank
But
you so much.
lovely story. Really, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Adriana Kantcheva. Um, and it's our custom at Story Hour just to chill for a moment between readers. Just pause, take a breath, kind of let the work we've just heard resonate and make room for the work we're about to hear. So I am going to just take a breath and pause. And I encourage you all to do whatever you feel like doing, but I'm going to just take a moment.
You know, though, I'm terribly greedy. I thought she said that we were going to get another story.
Really?
I thought she said a
Uh,
science fiction story and a fantasy story.
Oh, well.
I said that, yes.
Should we do that?
Yeah. You kidding?
Oh, okay. I
Okay.
start right away. This one's a bit shorter, so I should fit into the time. Okay, so that is indeed the fantasy story I wanted to read. It was originally published in Electric Spec. It's actually the first story I ever published, so I'm really happy to be able to read it here now.
Awesome.
It's called Clara, and I do need to mention a couple of content warnings. There is off-page mention of death of a child. It's nothing graphic or descriptive. And there's also mention of terminal illness. Okay, without further ado. Clara scuttled behind the upholstered chair as soon as Mom closed the door, preparing to get through another ghastly night. She never knew how the chair, neglected and uncared for, had ended up in her room, its embroidered seat unstitched at places and faded to a sickly beige green. It kept company with the large wardrobe from a sort of lacquered redwood. Both furniture pieces didn't belong in a child's room, yet there they were in Clara's mismatched one. But while the chair offered a sanctuary, the wardrobe wafted only menace as it glistened from the streetlight outside the window. Clara took a peek at her bed from behind the chair's backrest. They always expected her to cower beneath the covers, though Clara invariably scrambled out of bed as soon as her parents left her with their good nights. It was in the night that Clara missed Gregory the fiercest. Even before her mother's footsteps had died away, the wardrobe door creaked ajar, and one fuzzy paw wrapped around its glistening edge. The toy's recurring march began. They were all very old. One of the stuffed teddies had an ear that hung by a thread and wagged to and fro as the toy groped about in the dark, making its way to Clara's bed. A doll used the leg of another doll, now long gone, as a prop for her own missing leg. Some of the toys had belonged to Clara's brother or to Sin's grown-up cousins, for Clara had been refusing new toys ever since her 5th birthday, ever since Gregory left. One by one, the shadows slinked through from the wardrobe and surrounded the bed. Clara held her breath. The toys repeated the same ritual every night. When their siege was complete on all sides, they jumped atop the bed and stabbed and punched and kicked and bit the blanket as if Clara still curled underneath. The worst were the tin soldiers because they had a real weapon. Clara knew better than to scream. The few times she had called for her parents, Mom or Dad came only to quickly tuck her back in bed, scolding her for not falling asleep. They had hardly even noticed the toys strewn on the floor, the toys that Clara was certain had not been there before. Her parents promised not to come again when she called. True to their word, they didn't. Instead, Mom brought her to a smiling lady who asked her many questions. The lady listened to her story as if she believed and nodded a lot. And then, to her mom, the lady called Clara an imaginative child, or something like it. They all started nodding, and nothing changed apart from Clara never calling for help again. The toys had by now figured out that Clara wasn't in the bed and were furious. They quieted and, still atop the bed, started sniffling. Clara crawled underneath the chair and held Gregory's present tight. Her brother had always protected her. He was so much older, a whole 2 years older, and so much stronger. But after he left, Mom explained, with hollow eyes that didn't see Clara, that though Clara would continue to grow, Gregory would always stay the same. That was why she was to remember only the happy him, not the pale, thin him. But Clara didn't want to remember Gregory. She wanted to be with Gregory. Gregory had understood her. One day he gave Clara a present, a little luminous star that never went dark, even when the street lights outside were switched off in the middle of the night. The star was magical, Gregory had said. It had no switch and no battery, yet it never stopped glowing. As long as she held the star, nothing bad could happen to her. Gregory had promised. Yet, star or no star, Clara didn't dare stay in her bed at night. The toys had now spread across the room, searching for her. They never came looking under the chair, though, as long as Clara held on to the star. Leukemia, they had called it. That was why Gregory had to leave. But Clara knew better. He had maybe lost his own star one night, or had been too tired to escape his bed. Gregory had always been too tired just before leaving for good. Clara was certain that the toys had gotten him. One of these nights they would get her too. Maybe then Mom and Dad would love her as much as they still loved Gregory. A sudden realization seized her. That was the answer. She had to simply come out from underneath the chair and submit to the toys. Like this, she would never again have to endure another horrible night and would go to her brother. Clara wondered if it would hurt, but then she imagined playing with Gregory. If he no longer changed, they would now be the same age. She mustn't delay. She couldn't imagine a life where she was older than Gregory. Getting older than him was so very wrong. It would be just another reason for Mom to scold her. Clara had to be brave. She opened her palm where the star lay, luminous without casting light, hard to notice yet important, more important than the ceiling light or the stars or even the moon and the sun. She backed out from underneath the chair and stood tall. She took a deep breath that didn't stop the tears from welling and carefully placed the star on the chair. Then she turned around, took a few steps away, and waited with closed eyes for the onslaught to begin. Any time now. She could hear their slow scraping steps towards her. She wound her arms tight around her body. She waited some more. Clara lost patience and opened her eyes. The room teemed with shadows, some larger, some smaller, some moved, some didn't, but none had come any closer to her. Was the star still protecting her? Clara returned to the chair, but she couldn't find the small luminous fleck that should have been there. Furious, she groped at random for the star. Finally, her fingers found its sharp edges and lifted it to the faint light from the window. The star had gone out. A knot came undone in Clara's little body, and a great flood of tears deluged. She ran to the door and threw it open. The bulb in the corridor was still on, and light streamed into the room. Clara couldn't believe there was so much light just a flimsy door away. Wailing, she ran to the wardrobe and pulled its doors apart. The plastic eyes of piled up toys glinted nonchalantly at her. Clara grabbed at the pile and, with fingers wet with tears, started ripping the toys apart. Mom and Dad ran into her room. Before they could use their stern voices, Clara threw a shaggy dog's head at them and yelled, "They wouldn't take me! Now I'll never go to Gregory. Now you'll never love me." For a moment, her mother's face tightened in anger as a plastic leg hit her in the stomach. But then she knelt down next to Clara and pulled the little girl in a soft embrace for the first time in 2 years. That's it. Thank you.
That was lovely also. I'm so glad we got another one from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Adriana Kantcheva, folks. And we are going to take another brief breath before we move on. All right, here we go. Gregory A. Wilson is professor of English at St. John's University, where he teaches creative writing and speculative fiction, and is author of Clemson UP's The Problem in the Middle, Liminal Space and the Court Mask, book chapters, and journal articles. Outside academia, he is author of the epic fantasy The Third Sign, the award-winning graphic novel Icarus, and the Grey Assassin trilogy featuring Grey Shade, Renegade, and Heretic. This includes the new Grey Shade tabletop role-playing game designed by Brandon O'Brien, and the 5e adventure sourcebook, Tales and Tomes from the Forbidden Library, plus many short stories. Under the moniker Arvan Eleron, he runs a Twitch channel focused on story and narrative with many sponsored TTRPG campaigns over the years from companies like Free League, Cubicle 7, and Pegasus Spiel. And he has conducted workshops, done readings, and presented on panels at many national and international conferences and conventions. Gregory lives with his family in Connecticut. His virtual home is Gregory A. Wilson.com. And Gregory, I just want to say personally, professor who is out as an avid gamer. I'm completely serious about that. It gives me hope for the Academy. So thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, the Academy needs it these days. Thank you also to thank you to both of you for having us. Also, thank you to Adriana for those lovely stories. A quick note: my father had a Fulbright scholarship to Bulgaria, to the University of Sofia, and was the first person to translate a Bulgarian poet, Petra Barova, into English. So I have a lot of fondness for Bulgaria because of the family connection, so to speak. The story that I'm going to read is, I think, probably too long for a second, although if we end up having time, I'll read a funnier one. But this one is a story that originally appeared in an anthology called Time Travel Tales, and then was later republished in an anthology called Mythical a few years back, and it is called Sanction. I have an army. Oh, sorry, one thing. Content note. If anyone is nervous about ants, it's not. There's some ants in this. We'll see. I have an army, Sheshenzu said. He stood in the center of the room of silence, arms folded rigidly against his chest, clad in the outfit of the 7 generals, full armor of interlocking plates of dark metal, ceremonial dagger in a leather sheath at his waist, agonizingly sharp shanto in a worked leather scabbard on the opposite side, dark crimson cloak flowing behind him. He was tall, much taller than anyone else at the placid temple, and his dark eyebrows stuck out over a pair of smoldering brown eyes which were fixed, as they had been for the past 10 minutes, on the back of a small figure, dressed in a robe of simple brown cloth, kneeling in front of the equally small and simple altar of remembrance. Zheng Yao, standing next to Sheshenzu, ran a hand through his dark hair and cleared his throat uneasily. He had expected this eventuality, as indeed he expected everything which ultimately came to pass, for 2 weeks now, ever since the young messenger had come stumbling into the front hall of the placid temple, drunk with exhaustion, staying conscious just long enough to pay his respects to the blessed Channel Zhu before collapsing. But the message he carried on a piece of rolled-up parchment in an inside pocket of his cloak was clear enough. Shesun Zhu demands sanction from the blessed Channel Zhu. He is less than 2 days away. Sanction, as Zheng Yao thought about it sourly, was perhaps the most irritating of words. Its literal meaning never fit with the actual situations in which it was applied. To sanction meant to approve of, to support, even to encourage, and there was very little in Shesun Zhu's background which would have given the Placid Temple good reason to approve, support, or encourage him to do anything other than retire and return to a life of quiet contemplation. But Shesun Zhu had left that life behind many years ago. He was all honed sharpness now, all edges and angles and points, and there was nothing for him here anymore. Except, of course, sanction. There was that. "I have an army," Shesun Zhu repeated, his voice louder. To speak in the room of silence was a violation of centuries-old tradition, but then the first general had showed little interest in respecting any of the Placid Temple's other traditions to this point. He opened his mouth as if to speak again, but stopped as the small figure finally stood with slow and great effort and turned to face him. The small man's face was old, lined and creased like parchment upon which words had been written and rewritten countless times until it had grown so thin that a simple breeze might break it into 1,000 constituent parts floating away on the wind. A thin white beard outlined the mouth and ran along the jawline to the ear, while equally thin white eyebrows rounded over the eyes, their color as deep blue as the sparkling sea. The figure's steady, fathomless gaze caught and held Shesun Zhu's fierce one for a long moment, and Zheng Yao sensed a slight shift in the first general's posture. But before he had time to process it, the figure lowered his gaze, turned, and shuffled for the exit to the room of silence. Shesun Zhu blinked, then turned and marched after him, slow but steady, with Zheng Yao close behind. Ever since he was a little boy, Zheng Yao had felt a sense of relief when leaving the room of silence. Though there was comfort to be had in the peaceful quiet of the chamber, his thoughts often ran too quickly without tasks to keep them busy. And for all his love for the Placid Temple and the edicts of the blessed Channel Zhu, there was terror in the introspection it demanded of its adherents. There was no way to hide from oneself, after all. So Zheng Yao had been fortunate that he had found something which fit both his talents and his terrors. Scribe of the Placid Temple, the one person, beside the blessed Channel when he so wished it, permitted to speak within and without the temple walls. But even for him, speech was forbidden within the room of silence, and so he was glad to leave it, hearing the sounds of spring morning wash over him as they crossed into the courtyard, birds twittering, the reeds near the pond at the center of the courtyard rustling in the soft breeze. The first general, of course, seemed singularly unmoved by any such considerations. Zheng Yao could practically hear his teeth grinding, the impact of his metal boots on the flat stone echoing through the courtyard as they walked along. "I will have an answer," he finally said, voice strained, as they came alongside the pond and stopped. The old man was gazing into the depths of the pond, watching with what looked like a small smile as the orange and purple carvoy fish swam to and fro below the gently rippling surface of the water, and showed no sign of having heard Shesun Zhu. "I have been, out of respect for the Placid Temple's traditions and, of course, yourself, more than patient so far," Shesun Zhu said. Zheng Yao winced. Using any but the old man's full ceremonial title when addressing him was a horrific breach of decorum, although he doubted very much the first general would care, but the old man still had no reaction, staring down into the water. "But that patience cannot continue," the general went on. "I must march in the morning, and I must have sanction by then." Zheng Yao cleared his throat again. Such a sanction is unprecedented, with so little time to consider the request, most revered First General. The Blessed Channel must meditate and pray about the possibilities, and I am not addressing you," Shesun Zhu snapped, not even looking in Zheng Yao's direction. "If I desire conversation from servants, I'll ask for it. The only one who can answer my request is him. And I will have that answer now, Blessed Channel." His relentless gaze bore into the old man, tranquilly observing the fish. "I have an army," he said for the third time after a long moment. "You need only tell me whether you grant sanction for the army to operate as it must." You have an army, the Blessed Channel Zhu said, somewhat feebly after a long pause. He looked up and smiled at Shesun Zhu, who for a moment was startled into silence. "They say it is a strong army, far stronger than any in the province, or indeed the nation. It is well trained and highly loyal." He walked slowly to the edge of the courtyard and looked out. "And as I might have expected, it is legion." Zheng Yao, coming alongside the first general in the Blessed Channel, gasped. In ancient times, the Placid Temple had been built on a flat-topped hill with a commanding view of the surrounding countryside, and Zheng Yao had spent much of his childhood gazing out at the land beyond. To the north and south lay miles and miles of grassland, rocks and gently rolling hills, spotted here and there with a few low trees and bushes. Close by to the east lay the border, separating the nation of Yinshan from its neighbor Beisheng. So close he could see the guard towers of Beisheng standing watch over its side of the divide. And to the west the land gradually sloped upwards to the foothills and mountains which separated the narrow eastern portion of Yinshan from the rest of the country, where most of its people lived, worked, and governed. But there was more than that today. For as Zheng Yao looked to the west, he saw flags fluttering in the breeze, hundreds, thousands of them, a rainbow of colors reflecting the different provinces, principalities, and villages of Yinshan, but also the dominant color of dark crimson, the chosen color of the first general. The spearheads and tall shields held by each soldier glinted in the sun, and the spear shafts waved gently to and fro like the grass on which the soldiers stood. As he stared, Zheng Yao thought he heard Shesun Zhu give a small, satisfied grunt of approval. "Legion, yes," Shesun Zhu said. "The largest army ever assembled, and the most disciplined. I have personally seen to the training of the division commanders, and they in turn have drilled the soldiers until one of my divisions could wipe out any other nation's entire force." He turned to the Blessed Channel, still looking out at the army tranquilly. "And now they will have the chance to do so. They await only your sanction, the same sanction you gave many years ago. I ask nothing I have not asked before." The Blessed Channel Zhu's expression did not change. "Your reasons for asking have changed, Shesun Zhu." The first general stiffened at the use of his familiar name, his dark eyebrows gathered into disapproving angles. "That is not true. You of all people should know it is not true." He turned away again and gazed out on his army. "When I came here 10 years ago, I was young and foolish. I knew nothing of the world or its workings, only that I needed to do something, anything, to keep Yinshan from tearing itself apart." He sighed, his eyes suddenly losing focus. "My father was old then, weak and feeble. His strength had gone, but he had the sense to send me here for counsel and learning, to become more than the young fool I was, to shape me into the leader I needed to be, to restore the faith of my people." He looked back at the Blessed Channel. "And I was shaped into that leader. What I learned here made me strong enough to unify our people, to resist invasion, to become First General. I ask nothing more than the same support now." 10 years ago, the Blessed Channel said after a long moment, still staring at the First General's army, "you asked for sanction to protect Yinshan from invasion. You asked for sanction to repel invaders and restore the peace. And the Placid Temple gave you sanction to do those things." "And I did them," Shesun Zhu said, a slightly petulant edge to his voice. "I did what I was tasked with doing. I drove back the invaders from Beisheng. I annihilated their army. I unified our people." Zheng Yao watched as the first general lifted his angular chin into a defiant line. "I saved Yinshan, and I became first general because of it." "That is true," the Blessed Channel said, nodding his head once. "It is why we gave you sanction. The time is no different now. Yinshan must grow, expand if it is to stay unified and remain as one people. Beisheng attacked us 10 years ago. They must pay the price for that attack now." "Did they not pay the price for it then?" the Blessed Channel Zhu asked quietly. "No," Shesun Zhu replied immediately, biting off the word as he spoke it. Too many of us paid our lives to protect Yinshan. There was no reckoning for Beisheng. The destruction of their army served only to stop their invasion. It did not render judgment on their actions. Such judgment, the blessed Channel Zhu said, watching as a hawk soared overhead, making several wide circles over the numberless soldiers before flying off into the distance, is neither yours nor ours nor any mortals in the world to render. We taught you many things when you were with us, Shesun Zhu. Strength, yes. Will, yes. Suddenly he turned his gaze to the first generals. But also wisdom, humility, most of all, mercy. The knowledge that vengeance is as fleeting as the wind which sweeps over these plains, as transient and shallow as a child's sand structure swept away by the sea. Those last lessons were far more important than the first ones. Yet you seem to have forgotten them. Shesun Zhu's face worked, his features contorted to a scowl, and Zheng Yao waited for the reaction he knew was coming. When I came here, the first general finally said, his voice a low, menacing rumble, you taught me how to find my strength from the earth, my passion from the wind, my fury from the storm. I took those lessons and saved Yinshan. But now you have become weak, feeble, like my father was, he said, fists clenching as they rested at his sides. You no longer have the strength to advise the 7 generals, nor the wisdom to keep our country safe. So I will no longer ask. I will no longer beg. Now I demand. I have an army. You will give me sanction. You will give it to me now, and I will march into Beisheng and show the world how strong Yinshan has truly become. Zheng Yao gasped again. You would threaten... But the first general turned to him with such a look of murderous fury that the scribe of the placid temple fell silent. Shesun Zhu stared at Zheng Yao for another moment before turning to the blessed Channel. I will have your answer, he said, his voice now ragged with passion. The blessed Channel Zhu regarded him for a long moment. No, he finally said. Shesun Zhu's face contorted in rage again, and his hand drew back from his hip. For a moment, Zheng Yao feared he would strike the blessed Channel where he stood. But then the hand dropped again, and the first general turned on his heel and strode away. He stopped after a few steps. You have until morning, he said over his shoulder. When the sun rises, I will ask again. And if you do not grant me sanction then, I will invade Beisheng anyway. Once I have brought them to heel, I will return. He looked back. I will return, and I will level the placid temple when I come. Then he turned away again, and with a swirl of his dark crimson cloak he was gone. Zheng Yao swallowed. Blessed Channel Zhu, what can be done? The blessed Channel was now looking down at the ground. With an effort he lowered himself to a sitting position, still gazing downwards, and placed his hand palm up on the ground. A small black ant crawled onto his palm. Blessed Channel? Zheng Yao said. But the blessed Channel Zhu did not seem to notice, smiling at the black ant crawling over the mountains and valleys of his wrinkled palm. Blessed Channel, Zheng Yao said again, a little more insistently than was strictly polite. Yes, scribe, the blessed Channel responded at last, still looking at the ant. What can we do? Zheng Yao repeated. He looked out at the first general's army, a menacing sea waiting to sweep over the placid temple. Even if word could reach the armies of the other generals, and even if they could all come to defend us by tomorrow morning, the first general's army is far greater than all of theirs combined. How can we refuse him sanction? The blessed Channel Zhu frowned ever so slightly as he looked up at Zheng Yao. Because we must not grant it? Zheng Yao shrugged his shoulders, feeling helpless. But we will be destroyed, and Beisheng too. We cannot stop Shesun Zhu. The blessed Channel nodded thoughtfully. You expect that he will succeed? Zheng Yao nodded, somewhat surprised. Yes, blessed channel, I can see no other outcome. The old man nodded again. Then we must be prepared for that outcome, scribe. We will each consider it this evening, and then we will see what the morning brings. And he looked back at the ant, which had made its way to his thumb and was now beginning to climb it, slowly and patiently. That night passed poorly for Zheng Yao, tossing and turning on his simple cloth mat on the floor of the scribe's room. His love for the placid temple and the blessed Channel Zhu was fighting with his knowledge of the world, and no matter how many times he ran over the possibilities in his head, he could see no way to avoid war and absolute destruction. The first general would never relent, and the blessed channel would never turn from a path he had set for himself and the placid temple. And all for Sanction, a ceremonial mark of approval which, as important as it might be to the people of Yinshan, would have no effect one way or the other on the ability of Shesun Zu's army to overwhelm his foes. Zhegyu knew more of the ways of the world than the other residents of the Blessed Temple, and he knew that no respect for wisdom or age would hold back the first general. There must be something words can do, he said to the heavy darkness. There must be something I can say. But the darkness did not reply, and Zheng Yao, tears in his eyes, rolled to and fro on his mat until he finally dropped into a restless sleep filled with dark dreams and darker outcomes. He was woken by the rays of the early morning sun hitting his face, blinding him as he opened his eyes and rolled into a sitting position. Suddenly he heard shouts and the sound of clashing metal outside, and he quickly put on his sandals before clambering to his feet and running from the room. As he descended the stairs, the noise got louder until he emerged from the temple, blinking in the brilliant sunshine. The blessed Channel Zhu was at the edge of the temple courtyard again, staring out onto the land beyond, as several monks from the placid temple stood behind him at a respectful distance. As Zheng Yao stopped next to the blessed channel, his heart sank. The first general's army was still there, but now it was positioned away from the placid temple, looking like the vast head of a spear pointed directly at the border of Beisheng. Sitting on a magnificent horse, armor and helmet shining in the sun, was Shesun Zu, his hand in the air. The shouts coming from his soldiers had stopped, presumably at his command. On another horse next to him was the flagmaster, holding black and white triangular flags on two long poles. After a moment, the flagmaster hoisted both flags into the air. Zheng Yao was no warrior, but he knew well enough what this communication meant. The white flag meant yes, the black flag no. Sanction, or no sanction. There was a pause. Then the blessed channel nodded to one of the monks behind him, and as Zheng Yao looked, he saw the young monk lift a tall pole resting in the grass into the air. Fluttering from the top was a black flag. No. A long time passed. Then Shesun Zu turned his horse away, and a horn blast echoed from his vicinity, immediately echoed by other horns in the distance. Slowly, inexorably, the army of the first general began to move away towards the border of Beisheng. Zheng Yao felt a lump in his throat as he watched. Then he heard a voice. It was quiet, but familiar. And as he looked over, he saw that the blessed Channel Zhu had his eyes closed, his arms outstretched towards the army. At first the words were strange, foreign, but as Zheng Yao listened, he began to notice a familiar pattern, reminding him of something in his studies from long ago, something very old, something... And then it hit him. They were familiar words after all, but in the wrong order, the wrong cadence, the wrong inflection. It was... Sanction, he breathed. The words of Sanction. In reverse. As he watched, the army of the first general grew smaller in the distance, but much smaller, and much too quickly. After a few moments, he saw the disciplined formations beginning to break apart, the inexorable forward push becoming confused, disjointed. The army grew smaller, its advance more disrupted, until Zheng Yao could no longer see anything but Shesun Zu on his horse. Within a minute, the army was gone, replaced by the usual grassland waving softly in the gentle breeze. Only the first general remained, his horse now motionless beneath him. Zheng Yao stared, mouth agape. After a few moments, he turned to the blessed Channel Zhu, whose eyes were open, his face looking more wizened and lined than ever. His expression was serious, even sad. Blessed Channel Zhu, Zheng Yao finally managed. What did you do? At first the old man did not answer, but finally, as if he was only now hearing the question, he glanced at Zheng Yao. We revoked Sanction, he replied simply. Did you not expect it? Zheng Yao shook his head mutely. The blessed Channel nodded and looked back at the empty fields below, where thousands of soldiers had stood just a minute before. Sanction, Zheng Yao, is not permanent. It must first be earned, and then it must be kept. When Sheshenzu came to us, we taught him as best we could. Some taught him of strength, and others of skill. But I taught him in the ways of mercy and humility, and I failed. I failed twice, for he did not learn my lessons, and I did not know that he had not learned them. And so when he requested sanction, we granted it to him. We gave him an army. From where? Zheng Yao asked, his voice strained. The blessed Channel smiled. Why, from everywhere. He motioned above, below, the sweep of his arm taking in the world around the placid temple. The birds who fly, the animals who run, the insects who scurry. At the time, Sheshenzu's need was great and his motives true. So we gave him sanction and gave him his army. We did what had to be done. He did not know, Zheng Yao said, thinking suddenly of the ant on the palm of the blessed Channel Zhu's hand. No, the blessed Channel replied. He knew only that he had sent out a call for soldiers to come to the defense of Yinshan, and day after day those soldiers came until his army was formed. So he drew strength and courage from the rightness of his cause, and he defended Yinshan and drove the forces of Beisheng back. And he went away, and I was troubled, for though Yinshan needed to be united, I did not know if the power of the army he commanded would stir other thoughts in him. He paused for a moment, looking out at the motionless figure of Sheshenzu. And there I failed a third time, for I thought he would eventually learn the traits of mercy and humility if he did not already have them. But he became first general, and his thoughts turned to power and domination and vengeance. When he came to us this time, he wished for our sanction to give him the moral right to wage war. Yet he did not know that sanction had made it possible for him to wage war at all. Zheng Yao ran a hand through his black hair. Where did the army go? Back to where it came, the blessed Channel said, looking down at the ground. Zheng Yao saw a black ant scurry past his sandaled feet and nodded slowly. Then I understand what has happened, though for the first time I did not expect it, the scribe of the placid temple said with a small smile. But what? He was interrupted by a horn blast, and looking up, he saw the first general galloping wildly away from the placid temple towards the border of Beisheng, his horn echoing over the fields again and again. Zheng Yao looked at the blessed Channel Zhu and was surprised to see a single tear roll down the old man's cheek as he watched the ant. As he turned back, he saw what looked like dark rain whistling from the guard towers on Beisheng's side of the border, and a few seconds later he saw Sheshenzu's horse jerk as if it had hit an invisible wall. In an instant, the first general disappeared from view. His last horn blast was cut off, replaced by a heavy, brooding silence. For several minutes all was quiet. Finally Zheng Yao spoke. A fool, he said angrily. A child and a fool. A bad student and an arrogant shh. The blessed Channel Zhu said, kneeling on the ground, watching his hand as a small black ant made its way around its lined, undulating contours. He was the first general. He had an army. He smiled as the ant paused at the base of his thumb, before beginning its upward journey. For a short time, he had Sanction. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Gregory A. Wilson, folks. What a program. Thank you both so much for sharing your work with us. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you again for having us.
Thank you. That was
Gregory A.
a pleasure.
Wilson, Adriana Kantcheva, and my co-host, Laura Blackwell. Thank you so much for all that you do. I appreciate you a lot. Thank you again to SIFWA for helping us keep the lights on. And thank you all out there for coming back every week for nearly 5.5 years now. And like I said at the beginning, we are really not going anywhere. So come on back next week, because next week we will have Christopher Tradowski and Debbie Urbanski, and me and Laura. So until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you soon. Good night, everybody. Or good morning, as the case may be.